I'm a fan of fantasy, so I listen to Easy and Alan on their Just a Fantasy Fan podcast. During the show, you can live chat with Easy and Alan at LennyMelnickFantasySports.com. Rumour has it, Lenny only swings one way, with Launch Angle. Now here's Easy and Chris Allen. Rumour has it, Lenny only swings one way, with Launch Angle.
Well, I'm getting echo there somewhere, Chris.
What happened?
I don't know. Me sitting here playing too much.
Keep messing with stuff, man. That's what happens.
I'm getting echo there somewhere, Chris.
What happened?
I don't know. Me sitting here playing too much.
Do you have the YouTube feed playing back into?
Hold on. Echo there somewhere, Chris.
What happened?
I don't know. Still there? You hear me?
Yep.
I think that's what I had. I was doing some stuff earlier, and I think we're on the air now. Is the echo gone there, guys? That's what happens when I'm sitting here playing by myself, waiting on you. I was hitting buttons, doing all kinds of crazy stuff.
Oh, so this is my fault. Oh, okay.
No, it's not your fault. Not your fault. Welcome to a Fantasy Fan Sportscast where, that's right, we're live. We're live on YouTube, and we're also live at the LennyMelnickFantasySports.com where you can come to the chat room and talk with us. Like I said, I play with some buttons, do some things, and, we'll get it down. I've got like 4 streams I started at the same time, and I was playing with some stuff. I was chatting with people in the chat room, but we're here now. I am Easy Kill. My co-host every Wednesday night is Chris Allen. Chris, how you doing this evening?
I'm doing quite well. I think week 1 went all right for me in my leagues, and so I'm quite happy, ready to get into week 2 though.
Well, good. That's good. I mean, we'll get into a little bit of that. They can find you, on Twitter. You're at Chris Allen FFWX, which
yes, sir.
It took me a while to realize what FFWX meant or stood for, but that's Fantasy Football Weatherman, or just weather. So I know. There's a lot of weather issues. I think a game or two last week, and then obviously this week there's weather issues. Has that been something you've had to deal with much this week?
Yeah. So the whole weather tilt started happening over the Pittsburgh-Cleveland game. I was getting quite a few questions, or I saw a lot of people talking about it on Twitter. So I started, conversing with folks back and forth. I actually talked with I don't know if you follow him, but Al Zeidenfeld. The big DFS player. I submitted some data that he was asking about for the rain conditions, so I talked with him back and forth, and then a few other folks were asking questions about wide receiver 1 output in rain heavy games, how the Pittsburgh team would how they've normally reacted under bad weather games, things of that nature. So all of that stuff.
And then, honestly, before we even get started, the people on the East Coast preparing for some bad weather. We hope all of you are safe. I know out in the chat room we have Beach Bum, who's always there every morning and chatting. He's had to leave. He's from Myrtle Beach. I know he's had to do some traveling today. So we wish everybody, be safe, get out of there. There's no reason to stick around to watch football or anything on the weekend. So go inland and watch a game at, B-Dubs or Hooters. Don't stay there where the storm's coming. So speaking of that, storm-wise, East Coast, from what I understand, there's not too many major weather issues. I mean, there's obviously some games that are going to have some rain and some issues, but I don't think there's, I think the closest is Washington, and I think there's a Florida game. Are any of those going to be affected majorly this weekend?
Actually, yeah, I pulled some forecast data earlier today, and surprisingly enough, the Washington Indianapolis game doesn't seem to be affected. I didn't see too much of a chance of rain for Sunday afternoon, but the Jacksonville New England game, that one might feature some rain. And then also there was one of the Tampa Bay game, Tampa Bay Philadelphia, that one might have a little bit of rain and some high winds as well. So, but nothing in the direct path of Florence. Is that the name of the hurricane that they're giving it? Oh, it was Florence.
Yeah, I think that is.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think now, earlier yesterday, they thought it would turn and go north. I think now they're all saying it's going to go south. I think north would have obviously affected Washington more, but now I think they're projecting, but it's a hurricane for a reason, because a hurricane, you could predict exactly what it was going to do. A hurricane, anything's liable to happen.
Oh, look at you, man. Like, I've never even heard the word. Like, hurricane? I've never heard of that before.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's why it's a hurricane, because no one knows what the hell it's going to do.
I did not know that until right now.
You didn't realize it. That's why it's not a hurricane, because a hurricane we would know. A hurricane, I mean, see, you're the weather guy. These are things you need to know, man.
I just need to know if it's going to rain or not. That's all I need to know.
There you go. Well, and you know what? In fantasy football, and I know you've done articles and all that, I always hear that rain isn't as big an issue as major wind. Is that still a fact?
Yes, that's from my research that I've done over at 4for4. That is the major component for any like poor fantasy games. It's mostly it's wind and snow. Snow we can generally predict because we know where it's going to happen. It's going to be like Buffalo, maybe Cincinnati, Cleveland, the northeast part of the country. But then for wind can happen pretty much anywhere. But those are the two big conditions that really tank weather, really tank fantasy.
That affect a game.
Unless it's coming down in sheets like it was, I guess, at some points during the Pittsburgh game. But it really has to be coming down in order to really put a damper on fantasy football.
Right. Okay. So and then I think like I said, I think there's a game in Jacksonville.
Yeah, Jacksonville, New England.
Game in Atlanta, but I think Atlanta's in a dome, right? So
yeah, Atlanta's in a dome, so that one should be okay. But then, like the Tampa Bay Philadelphia game, that one is going to be that one looks to be affected by either rain or wind or both.
Right.
So any one of those that are going to be played in the southern states, yeah, we need to be watching those.
All right. Well, we'll keep our. Keep our ears open, our eyes open, the Weather Channel on, some of that. The other issue is just we wanted to get into a little bit of last week. Let's kind of do that first. I didn't get my normal Sunday. I ended up going to a game. You all knew that. So
I heard you were in Indianapolis. That's right.
I was. I got to see my Bengals just
we won.
They just destroyed the Colts. I don't care what anybody says. Had good seats. Had a lot of Bengals fans around us. That was fun. A couple Colts fans. They were pretty nice. We had a good time. It was. We were up a little high, but got to see the field. Still got to see everything go on, and I mean, it was a good time. But obviously, it changed my fantasy viewing, and every once in a while I'd get on my phone and look up things, and my daughter would, Dad, just watch this game. I mean, so
it's with your daughter. Come on.
I know she took me. So when she got up and her boyfriend went and got some, dogs and stuff, Dad would get on his phone and check stuff. And,
there you go.
And watch. But obviously I have tried to watch a few of the other games, and stuff since then, to kind of catch up. I struggle with watching games, because I'm no analyst or anything like that, but to watch games once I know who wins and the fantasy day's over, I struggle. I do have the Game Pass, so I can go watch the games, even in the condensed version. That it's even worse. The condensed version, I find the play ends so quick and the next play is starting that I forgot what happened. I mean, I don't get it.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It's not the same. Yeah, you get to see all the plays, but you don't have that time to soak it in, for the next play. And I'm like, what just happened? Then the next thing's happening. And obviously, already knowing some of the things that happen, you're like, I think this is when that happens. And you're just, I find that watching it that way, even it's just not the same as having 6 TVs on and watching them all at the exact same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a much, much more pleasant experience. So, how was your Sunday watching for the debut?
I was able to. I sat down and watched the Indianapolis game as well. I didn't see you in the crowd.
Well, I didn't think they had TVs cameras up where I was at.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, I was trying to look for you, but I didn't see you. But I watched that game exclusively during the early games, and then for the later games. Well, I was trying to catch the end of the Pittsburgh-Cleveland game since that one went into overtime,
right?
And then for the later games, I wasn't able to watch those. But then, of course, I sat down to watch the Sunday night games, the Sunday night game rather. So I mean, I got to take in quite a bit of football.
Right. Are you a Sunday ticket guy or anything like that, or you just have the local games?
I just have the local games, and now I've got Game Pass now as well. So okay. I've gone back and watched. I've gotten through about half of the games from last week already.
All right. Well, again, it seems like we got started a little crazy, just running a few minutes late, and then Easy had some button click, but appreciate we have a couple people on the in the chat room with us today at the Lenny Melnick FantasySports.com Cardinal 1B or first base. He actually had a show on just before this where we talked dog training. We actually talked dog training. And yes, he had a dog trainer on. They talked a little bit of fantasy. The dog trainer guy was a DFS guy and did fantasy. But he owns a company where he trains dogs and stuff, and it's in the family. They've been doing it a long time. Huh. I'm a dog guy. It was interesting. It was fun. I had a good time. I got to ask some things in the chat room. I put a picture of my puppies in there, Easy sensitive for the four-legged critters. It was a good time. So, but he's out there in the chat room. Cub Bob, who's actually been in and out of the hospital this week, he's out there. Earlier was Andrea and a few other people. If you have any problems, questions, issues, post them in the chat room, and we'll try to answer those. You can same thing. You can find me on Twitter. I'm easy at afantasyfan. And Chris is Chris Allen at FFWX. Always shoot us information there. Also, I got us a telephone number.
Oh,
in the near future, we're going to take calls. I'm working on that.
Right? We have to switch to Skype, right?
No, I don't know. No, I'm.
You figured it out?
I'm getting there. Okay. But because just looking at your pretty face is too much fun. So on YouTube, it's just too much fun.
Well, I know. I mean, I do try and work on it.
But for right now, getting ready to go. I wanted to try. I should have done this last week. I was a little behind, but I wanted people to have a phone number. At least now you can call this phone number, leave a voice message. I have the ability to edit this, put it on air, give us a detail of a trade or a question or anything like that. And then, in a future show, we'll be able to play it. But it's area code 937-719-1099. I'll post that a few places, but 937-719-1099, a Fantasy Fan Sportscast hotline. That's what I'm going with. It's our hotline, Chris.
We got a hotline now?
We have hotline.
Oh my gosh. We're big time in it here.
Easy. Easy doesn't do too much easily. I try to get as complicated. Hey, I'm just a believer. If you wanna look and feel and be professional, you gotta do what the big boys do. So. Right. We got a phone number. We got a hotline. Call, leave a voicemail, a detailed trade if you want. Leave a name. Call back if you want to get involved. We'll contact you even if you something like that. So call the number and we'll work on that. Today's show we are going to be talking about mainly for fantasy things. We'll get into a little bit. I mean, there's too many shows out there, in my opinion, that you can go listen to all the details and a lot of major things. So we're going to try to stress mainly fantasy things. So a lot of fantasy players have issues the first week after the first week. So this is mainly going to be a lot of do's and don'ts of week one, because a lot of people, make mistakes week one that can cost them a season. So that's what we'll get into here in a little bit. I had a couple sports things. I always like to, do a few quick little sports things once in a while. And the first one is a fantasy thing that actually happened last week, and I meant to bring it up and kind of forgot. But by any chance, the U.S. Open tennis, which I watched all week, I enjoy watching that. Did you get to watch any of that at all? And mainly the Federer. When Federer got upset, I want to say like the fourth round, it was like a Friday night or Saturday evening. I know it was one of the late matches. Where he got upset by like a non-seeded player. The guy who upset him was John Millman from Australia. I don't know if you noticed that. Did you see the interview after the match?
No, I didn't see it after the match. I saw parts of the match, and then I saw like the results after it won, but I didn't see the interview afterwards.
Why I bring this up is, in his interview, the woman asked him a few questions, and then she goes, well, you know, this match went kind of late. What will you be doing, you know, to get ready, you know, for your next match coming up? Because it's the first time you've been into, I think that put him in the quarters or semifinals. He goes, I can't sleep in. I have a fantasy draft at 7 a.m.
Priorities.
Yes. Yeah, I did too. I immediately jotted it down. I said, I just, he upsets one of the top tennis players of all time, some people would say. And what's he going to do the next morning to sleep in, to get ready for his semifinal? Nope. He's got to get up at 7 a.m. because Australian time, he's in a fantasy draft. And then he goes, if anyone has any tips out there, hit me up on Twitter.
Wow.
I found that, you know, again, back to fantasy becoming a little more mainstream. I found that very fascinating. That his big moment, his big interview, and he's concerned about his fantasy team.
Talking about fantasy. I love it.
There we go. So that was pretty big. The other thing is, did you see the Serena blow up in the U.S. Open?
I did see that. Yes, it's been plastered all across the news for like the last week.
I watched it live. I was watching that live. I personally see both sides. I think she went a little out of line, but I don't think he explained enough what was going on, and I think that's what got her a little more, you know, sometimes referees just, and I'm not going to say he was being arrogant, but sometimes they're like, I don't need to give you any more information than this. You know, that type thing. And I think she was more upset that the information she got was more minimal. I think if he'd explained things a little better, maybe she wouldn't have gone off like she did. But I do think, you know, like Mickelson that did in the golf match that one day, sometimes you just have to keep your head on a little bit. So, but I thought she went a little overboard, and I've watched a lot of tennis. Taken away, you know, a whole game like that, I thought was a little.
That's pretty big, from what I understand.
Well, it's never happened, I don't think they say so.
Oh wow,
pretty major. So
yeah,
you know, and then also the last thing in other sports, and we'll get into more fantasy, just because, and that's the Ryder Cup team getting picked. Are you excited to see Phil and Tiger made it on the Ryder Cup team?
Oh, absolutely, because I think
I was going to watch anyway, but that definitely will make it worth watching. So so we'll enjoy that. So we'll get. There is a weather question in the chat room, Chris.
Let's go.
I'm not even going to pre-read. I hope it's a good question. You know, it doesn't have any, you know, jokes in the middle of it. How do you view games such at the Cleveland game's weather last week? It seems like everyone always overreacts to just 20-mile-an-hour winds when we get that in weather every year in the NFL. What do you say that any wind gust over 35 should be avoided? So I think what he's asking is, do we get overexcited when it's maybe more weather than normal, but maybe not enough to affect a game? I know you've done stats on that. Where is the line of, and his specific question is wind related, where is the line as far as where wind does affect a football game?
To me, the noticeable effect occurs in the, let's say, anything over 13 to 15 miles an hour is where I start to get concerned. So the 20-mile-an-hour range, absolutely.
Concerned or overreact? And I think that, because that's his question. People overreact. At 13, I don't think you're overreacting at 13, are you? You're not.
No,
your number
concerned.
Two, you know, your number one quarterback, maybe. At what miles per hour are you sitting Aaron Rodgers?
At it'd have to be over 20 that I would sit Aaron Rodgers, because in the case of this past weekend with the Pittsburgh Cleveland game, I had Ben Roethlisberger on one of my rosters, but when I saw that not only was there going to be a combination of rain, and then the winds, that at least the forecasted winds were going to be somewhere in the 17 to 18 mile an hour range, and they were projecting gusts up to 30 miles an hour. So in that case, that's where the combination of the two weather conditions, I pivoted to Andy Dalton on that one, which it wound up working out, and I think that the process was fine for doing that. So yeah, I do think that we do tend to overreact to weather when there are other factors that I think you could also put ahead of weather that could lead you to the same conclusion. Like one, Ben Roethlisberger on the road playing in 1 o'clock games. He has he has not played well again.
Yes, I agree.
Yes. I don't agree with the home road splits, but the home road splits at 1 p.m. games, like that one there is a study out there that's been done, and he's not played well. So I think that there are other factors that you could put into play that can lead you to the same conclusion that maybe I should pivot to somebody else. But yes, I do think that weather is something that we tend to overreact to. And that's why I did all the studies that I've done, is that to show that it's not always going to be weather that's going to change how we view the quarterbacks. There are other things that we should consider.
Now, other than the quarterback, do the wide receivers, I mean, obviously the quarterback's affected, wide receivers are affected some. Is it more or less major than a quarterback and how they're affected for fantasy?
For wide receivers, it is less of an impact. So for wide receiver ones, I looked specifically at Antonio Brown and his numbers in order to find out whether or not he could still produce. His targets only reduced, I would say, within the 10 to 15% region, and we saw that on Sunday. He still wound up with a healthy amount of targets. He still got the touchdown. So I don't think that he was going to be affected. If anything, what I thought was going to happen was that the Pittsburgh would pivot more to the run game, which they did, and that actually showed in most of Ben's stats, is that his volume, or like the amount of passes that he would attempt in a game, dropped significantly, and the run game would pick up. And that's what we saw on Sunday. So I think there are trends that we can pick up, and so that we can actually try and use that information to our advantage in games where that stuff happens.
Now, his follow-up question is, has it been factual or proven that weather affects maybe quarterbacks who don't throw down the field as much? Or does it affect them all equally? You know, a guy like Rodgers. To me, Rodgers is a little hard because he can be a dunker or he can be a long guy. But let's take like the Blake Bortles, whose game is pretty much dump off. Is wind less likely to affect a game, or a fantasy for him than somebody who throws the ball long a lot?
Surprisingly enough, for quarterbacks that fall into that region, so if you look at, let's say, somebody like you just mentioned, so if we were to look at both Rodgers and Bortles, surprisingly enough, with Bortles, his pass attempts actually went up because for his adjusted yards per attempt, his AYA, he was throwing shorter passes. And so his efficiency would actually tick up because he would continue to throw those shorter passes. His volume wasn't affected as much as somebody like, let's say, Drew Brees, who saw some of his volume decrease whenever he would play outside, or somebody like Russell Wilson, who saw an adverse effect in terms of volume. But for players like that, like Russell Wilson, or even Tyrod Taylor, who took a hit in terms of the amount of times that he would pass, but Tyrod Taylor and Russell Wilson could make up their fantasy production with their legs. So there are games that you can play or trends that you can see for players like that. But yeah, that does actually, it affects players differently or quarterbacks differently. So for somebody like Blake Bortles, I wouldn't be as concerned because he's not going to be passing the ball like 30 yards down the field as much as some of the other ones.
Right. So, and then as far as kickers, do you see a big issue with weather and kickers? Because I've actually kind of done the opposite sometimes. Sometimes on days where, now I'm not going to say 35-mile-an-hour winds, but on days where the weather's bad, sometimes I found that teams have trouble getting the ball into the end zone, so you actually end up with the kickers kicking the ball more and getting you those, 15, 18, 20-point games because there were no touchdowns. That's just not anything I've studied, but I don't necessarily go away from kickers. If it's a good kicker in a good stadium, even if it's outdoors, I trust them some. I mean, they know what they're doing.
To a point. If it was rain, sure. Snow, like light snow, maybe. But wind, it's harder for them to adjust because they have to kick the ball so high up where it's more susceptible to like gusts or even just the wind like moving the ball like off of its trajectory. So for kickers, I try and stay away from those when it comes to wind. But if it was anything else, yeah, I'm not as concerned about it.
Right. Because I think Buffalo was one of those, I think last year where, they had all that snow and they were having trouble moving the game. I think one of the kickers had like 15 points that game because he had like 3 or 4 field goals,
Right.
Because they could not get the ball into the end zone, so I don't necessarily stay away as much even there. That being said, it's back to managing your season. I'm also not going to drop a quarterback that has a weather issue or even, how do I say this? I'm not going to mess up my roster majorly by either having to drop a quarterback or drop a running back or wide receiver that I've been holding on for a while just to get another quarterback in there because there's some better weather issues. Hopefully my record's good enough and my team is strong enough other places that if my quarterback doesn't get me the 25, or the 20, he might still get me the 15, and I think that's a mistake some young players will do is they just immediately think, Aaron Rodgers is playing and it's going to be terrible and windy. I'm going to drop him and pick up Flacco who's playing in the dome. No, you can't do that.
No, I wouldn't suggest that. I mean, if you have somebody like Aaron Rodgers, or if you have somebody like Tom Brady, Drew Brees, some of these players that we would put in the elite level, no, I wouldn't suggest pivoting off them. That'd be more for the back half of the QB1s, the Roethlisbergers, the Staffords, or even some of the QB2s, the Ryans, where they're people that, or they're players that you don't have a ton of draft capital invested in them. So if you were to pivot off of them, you already know that the rest of your roster is situated such that you can make up for a floor game from a Joe Flacco. So if Joe Flacco were to score 15 points, you've got 8 other players that you're assuming are in better matchups that they can pull their weight. But for somebody like Aaron Rodgers that or at least you have the confidence that they're going to continue to score, even Aaron Rodgers' floor games, I would assume would be better than some of Joe Flacco's floor games. Right. So there is confidence in starting some of those guys in those situations. I would never. The only time I would advocate for sitting any of them again would be in those like a torrential downpour or just those extreme weather situations that we just don't see all that often. But but back to the person in the chat's point earlier is that we do wind up reacting or overreacting rather to some of these weather conditions, whatever they seem tweeted out.
We'll go into here in a minute when we get into our topic here in a few minutes, which is do's and don'ts, in week one or rookie players. And that is, again, if you build the right kind of team, you can overcome those type of weeks, where a quarterback might be in that situation. But at the same time, you just can't drop, somebody for 1 week. You have to look a little farther ahead. Now, I'll take advantage of that. If you're in let's say you're in week 8, 9, or 10, and you can't afford to lose a game because of playoff situations. I look for teams that are in that situation, and I might trade them for Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers is, let's say, playing the 35. I might text him and say, hey, Aaron, I know you got to win this week, and Aaron Rodgers is in the back spot. You really don't want to drop him. I'll give you Ben Roethlisberger this week, and we'll just, I'll trade you. I'll help you out. Yeah. So I take advantage. I hate to use the word take advantage because it's just a situation, where they can't afford to lose. And you might be able to, withstand that if you had to, and maybe you make your team stronger going into the playoffs. So, those are situations I look for. So,
yeah, I think that's definitely a viable strategy.
Anybody else got any questions out there on weather? Let us know. Chris is more than prepared for weather questions. Let's get into a few, and I think you started first of all. My first week was successful. I almost got that out. Yeah. Successful. I think out of 8 teams, I went 6-2. So the problem is the 2 I lost big, and both teams I had Diggs and Fournette on, and one of them I even had Njoku, the tight end. So I had 3 players on a team that didn't. The 3 of them didn't total a point. Those are hard to come back from, and so. Those were tough. The other ones, and I'm one of those that we've talked about that in other podcasts. I draft a lot of similar players because that's what I do. I'm not one of these. First of all, I'm a value guy, and values seem to always come up about the same, all the time. So I end up with a lot of similar players. But I had Diggs on another team. It didn't affect me because other people went off. I just happened when you combine 3 players that get no points, it's a little tough.
That's
so
hard.
You said your week was successful.
Yeah, I got six total redraft leagues, including my my Scott Fishbowl team. So I won in the Scott Fishbowl, so I'm 1-0 there. But then across my other 5, I think I lost in just one of them. So on the week, I went 5-1. So I'm happy with that start.
Bragger. And I know in my little home league where you joined, you end up pulling off a win. That was pretty tight most of the time I watched. So
yeah, I was sweating that one a little bit with.
Trust me, they want to beat you and me both.
I figured as much. So I figured like starting off with a loss.
That one. So
I figured it would be hard to come back.
And I got beat by the 2-time Super Bowl champion. He's 2 in a row. So
woof.
And he's a New England fan, so he always, he's got a team full of New England people. And I pick one New England guy, and they never score a point, and he's got like 5 of them, and they're always the 5 that go off. I don't get it.
Right.
So, but yeah, it was a fun week. So I enjoyed that. Let's get into some news and notes, mainly from the end of last week. We already killed a half hour. We'll get into some of the main things. I'd assume the first few things. Let's just do the Bell thing, get that over with. Because that was an issue going all the way into the weekend. My main draft happened, the week of, and somebody took Bell number 1, assuming he was going to play, and he didn't. What's your opinion on this? And are you on the side of we're going to see him in a few weeks, or are you on the side of it's going to go? We'll see him in week 11, maybe.
I'm of the inclination that we're not going to see him until week 11.
That's where I'm at.
If he's not playing, if he didn't play last week, and as of today, he hasn't signed his tender. He's not in team meetings. I believe Coach Tomlin had a press conference earlier today saying he hasn't been in contact with him in the last few days. The only person I believe I saw on Twitter earlier that Le'Veon Bell he contacted James Conner after the Cleveland game was over, but other than that, he hasn't been in contact with anybody in the team. So I think we're in a full-on holdout here. So I don't think that we'll be seeing him.
Is the word holdout correct?
Yeah, it's a holdout. And from what I understand, the team has removed him from the depth chart. So it could be he's either not going to play until week 10 or 11, or they're going to rescind the franchise tag and they're working towards trading him to somebody else.
Right. Again, I don't own him anywhere.
I've got him in best ball. That's about it.
Yeah, I don't own him anywhere. And, I was one of those. I mean, you talked about it. Remember early on, I told you I was not a running back fan in that first round. And you know what? I mean, hey, I'm not I realize it's week 1, but you know what? A lot of those first round running backs that win a lot of drafts did not produce week 1.
Yes, and unfortunately, other than Todd Gurley, if you played David Johnson in PPR leagues, he bailed you out with a touchdown and a few catches. I'm concerned about David Johnson, to be quite honest with you. I think he just popped up on the injury report with a back injury.
Yep.
But yeah, Ezekiel Elliott, that Dallas offense doesn't look good. So if you picked in the 1 to 5 spot in your draft, you're probably not doing so hot or feeling kind of anxious about your team.
Yeah, the teams where I whooped up on everybody are teams where I didn't take a running back. I obviously, I had Odell Beckham in a few. I had Hopkins didn't do great, but I also had, Evans obviously paid off.
Like Evans, yeah, that worked out well.
In a few, ended up being a good late round, second round pick or something like that.
Yeah.
So, Thomas, a lot of the wide receivers paid off. I think technically in the top 10, it was Barkley was like the only running back that outperformed, or what I would say gave what some people would, we had these high hopes of our number one draft picks.
Right.
And he did that, and even people question that. A lot of that came on one run, So, but points wise, he is the one running back that kind of paid off.
Right. Well, Alvin Kamara as well.
Oh, Kamara, that's right. That I was even putting him up. He went crazy.
Yeah.
So, that kind of was a little, crazy. So, what other major news and notes are you taking out of week 1?
I would say that other than just the overarching fact that wide receivers are back, baby.
Amen. So, and I'm glad I went no running backs for most of my leagues. I did not take running backs. The league I ended up keeping Gronk, and I debated back and forth. Gronk obviously paid off in week 1.
Yeah.
So
I think in pretty much every league that I'm in, well, all 6 of my redraft leagues, I think the only league where I had of like a top 5 draft pick was your home league, and I lucked out because I got Gurley.
Right.
But otherwise, all the rest of them I started Julio, Michael Thomas, Odell, Keenan Allen. So I'm sitting pretty right now. So I'm happy with the way that things are.
So far, it's week 1. So we get that quick injuries that may or may not affect fantasy. I guess the Doug Baldwin. Which I do have Doug in multiple leagues. Luckily, I drafted wide receiver heavy, so I'm able to maybe combat that for a few weeks.
All right.
Open. The key there is, does that really make luck more valuable, or does that make? I just forgot the running back, the wide receiver from the Jets, and who am I thinking about? Who's the second there now?
Over in Seattle.
Yeah.
Brandon Marshall.
Thank you. I picked him up this morning in a league. I couldn't remember. Right, I actually picked him up in 2 leagues. So, and I hope I only need him for a week or 2. I'm actually hoping I don't have to start him, but if things happen and if Doug Baldwin goes long enough, maybe that's something I'll need. So
it's worth watching because they're playing not Denver, though they just played Denver. Who is Seattle playing this week? I can't remember who they're playing right now.
I don't know why you're looking that up if you want to. But my point is, Seattle didn't look that good anyway. So I think a veteran like Marshall that's going to play out of the slot, a big receiver, middle of the field, if they can't protect Wilson, I think he's going to dump there a lot. So it could pay off. I think if you're able to – I didn't use a waiver order on him. No one picked him up, so I just took him, first thing this morning. Yeah. Oh, playing the Bears.
Yeah.
So
I think though, from what I saw and from what I read, Tyler Lockett actually shifted to the slot, which was what he played like I think only like 25% last season. But after Doug Baldwin went out, Tyler Lockett was the one that shifted to the slot, and Brandon Marshall stayed on the outside. So I think Tyler Lockett might be the beneficiary of some of those shorter targets, but I still think when it comes to like red zone goal line, those type of passes like in that area, which Russell Wilson wants to do or is historically known to do, Brandon Marshall, I think, will probably pay off there.
Right. What about Jaron Brown? Someone's asking in the chat room.
Jaron Brown, see, like he has the athletic profile to pop. I'm trying to figure out like how he's going to be used in that offense going forward. I think that this helps him. I would say that he'd be a speculative ad like behind Brandon Marshall and Tyler Lockett, because let's say Brandon Marshall doesn't have enough gas in the tank to continue on during the week. or like throughout the season, Jerron Brown I think he can profit off of that.
Well, again, as a Baldwin owner, I'm hoping this is only a 2 or 3 week thing. But
that's what they're saying. I guess I'm skeptical when it comes to knee injuries like that. Like, because he had it before the season started, and I know it's on the.
It was in
it's on the other knee, and I know that comes from probably overcompensating. But again, I'm just when it comes to knee injuries, man, that it's not something that's just going to go away.
On one team, I'm struggling because I had McKinnon and him, so I'm struggling there anyway. The other league I have him in, I wouldn't even mind if they set him 4 weeks. If he was healthy, and comes back healthy after week 4 or 5. I would rather, if your team can withstand that, I'd rather it be that way, that he's come back and you get 100% of Doug Baldwin.
Love to. I hope so. I've got quite a bit of them in best ball.
Now, a few injuries that maybe happened or didn't happen or weren't as bad, and obviously the first one's going to be Aaron Rodgers. What an exciting Sunday night of football. I have him on multiple teams. I'm not a draft quarterback early person, but I am a draft value person. And, I got Aaron Rodgers a couple times in some leagues for what I would consider pretty decent value. And obviously, when he went down, I was like, you're kidding, what?
Oh, yeah.
2 years in a row.
Yeah, that was just the worst. I was scared for him too, because I have Devontae Adams in our league. I have a decent amount of shares of Randall Cobb. So and I've got Jamal Williams as well. And he's the engine that makes that whole thing go. So we can't have that.
Right. Now, do you think he'll be on the field this week?
I do think he'll be on the field this week, and I think they'll try and manage it as much as
possible. I do too, mainly because who they're playing. I think it's going to be hard to keep him off the field when they're playing Minnesota.
Yeah, that's true. But surprisingly enough, Minnesota has always been one of the teams that has perennially slowed him down. I think it was against Buffalo, but when it comes to him playing Minnesota, I don't know what it is, if it's just the defense or if it's just because they're in the same division or whatever. But
it's not just strong.
Yeah, he's just not as strong. But I mean, of course, but we want him out there. You're playing him anyway. You're playing the receivers. You're playing all his weapons. But it's just, the matchup just seems to be one of those ones that gives him the worst time.
The other one that may or may not have had, and that's Leonard Fournette. They were talking about that in the chat room earlier today. And for fantasy people, nobody likes to see someone go out for the season, or someone you lose Baldwin for 4 or 5 weeks. No one likes to see that. But, man, sometimes worse is you have that guy that you don't know is going to start or not play a whole game. I mean, those can be more. I mean, obviously can sit Baldwin and get 10 points from somebody. I won't get the 18, but I'll at least get 10. Sure. But if you have Fournette and they say he's going to play, but then you don't know, is he going to play the whole game? Is he going to re-aggravate it? Or are they only going to play him, half? Because TJ Yeldon looked pretty good. And I know he was a big waiver wire pickup, which is what they were talking about in the room today. I didn't go after Yeldon for a couple reasons. One, I'm not sold based on the people I listen to that he's, a great running back. So, the concern would be, I don't think, and they have a third guy there that a young guy that they say is doing pretty well. I just think if Yeldon's out there a lot, they're going to split time a little more. I don't think he's going to get Fournette time.
No, I don't think so. It'll probably wind up being a shared backfield between him and Corey Grant. So,
and if Fournette comes back a little bit, you have the third, So
exactly. So it's a completely full blown committee. So to me, I'm not seeing the value. I know that from practice reports earlier today, he's supposed to test out the hamstring on Friday. So we probably won't hear anything about him tomorrow.
Right.
So Friday, Saturday will probably be the earliest that we'll get any news as to whether or not he's playing this week. But yeah, I mean, I avoided Yeldon as well. I saw in any of my fab budget type leagues, he was going anywhere from $20 to $30 out of $100 budget. That's just too much for me.
The guy in the chat room today said he bid a little. I don't remember exactly. Let's say around 380 or 390. Didn't get him. He went for a little over 400 in
$1,000 budget.
Yeah.
So 30%. Yeah, that sounds about where I was seeing him going.
He went for 40%.
40%.
Ended up actually going for. I think that's what I said in chat room. I'm like, you know what? If I lost him at that, I'd be okay with it. Meaning the other guy spent some money. Maybe I'll get the next main guy.
Exactly.
So I wasn't that excited. I mean, So we'll see how that goes. Kenneth Dixon, what's going on there in Baltimore? That's a big game already tomorrow night with our Bengals.
Yeah.
Is Alex Collins obviously the main guy as long as he can hold on to the ball, which seems to be a problem? What do you think that backfield right at the moment? And I think they have somebody else coming off of injured reserve here in a couple weeks anyway. I mean, so I think that there could be 4 different people in that backfield.
It's possible, but to me, it seems like this whole Kenneth Dixon saga he was a huge college prospect, and I thought that his athletic profile was great, especially for the fact that what they had in Baltimore at the time was going to be great for great pickup. But then he's often injured. He had the suspension last year. I just think it's time for fantasy owners, at least, and definitely the Ravens, to kind of move on from it, because Alex Collins has shown to be serviceable.
They obviously surprised a lot of fantasy people. I mean, they put up some points. Flacco was there. They were throwing the ball. They were running the ball. I mean, nah.
But it was only for like 3 quarters, because the defense was just completely blowing Nathan Peterman out of the water.
I mean, we're Bengals people. Are you worried about tomorrow night? Obviously, we're playing under the lights. That's always a problem. We're playing Baltimore. That's always a problem.
No. AJ Green has perennially torched the Ravens.
All right. Come on. So you're just convinced you don't even need to watch tomorrow. Is that what you're telling me?
Oh, I'm still going to be watching, and I'm probably going to tilt into the upside down watching it. But I still know at the end of the day, AJ Green is going to get me 100 yards and a touchdown. I know this to be true.
Well, Cha-Cha in the chat room says Yeldon is a god. I'm not sure I buy that. I mean, he could have some big weeks and pay off. We'll see.
Yeah, but at that point you're banking on Fournette being just out. Right. He has to be completely out in order for him to have value. And at this point, it's looking like at the very least, Leonard Fournette's going to be out for this week, but it's not going to be something that he's going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks.
Right. The other injury, Hill, Bengal guy, up to New England. I was excited about him. Didn't draft him anywhere, but I was hoping he'd do something.
I was too. Yeah, I really was.
For the season. What does that do to a backfield that already had issues? So, not issues, already had question marks.
I mean, it has even more question marks because Rex Burkhead popped up in the concussion protocol today.
I saw that.
Yeah, so now they're down to James White.
I'm banking on James White. I have James White in a few leagues where I picked him up late enough that I could sit him there. And Sony
Michel?
No, yeah. Is he even 100% healthy at this point?
Nope, not from what I've heard, because he was. I think today was the first time he'd been spotted in about a week or so.
All right. Okay. So, I don't know. I mean, I always want some of those New England people. I just can't pull the trigger.
That's why, the syrup's greater than the pancakes, man. So you just get Tom Brady whenever you can, and then you just take
I had Brady last year, and Brady didn't have a great fantasy year for where I drafted him.
Right.
Gronk seems to be the one, if he doesn't get hurt, that pays off.
That's the only other one. And then Edelman, you take the discount with his suspension, and then you get Edelman, and then you just wait for him to come back. That's it, man.
The last one, an injury I have, is Mariota. That's another one of those where we don't know. Obviously, I think I'm not a fan of him. Don't own him anywhere. And I'm not a fan of, his backup. I'm just more concerned about how this affects the wide receivers and everybody there. And does it bump up the running game?
Yeah, I think it'll bump up the running game if he's not gonna go. But from what I understand, he was out practicing earlier today. The elbow is probably going to be somewhat of a concern. I think beat reporters were saying that, and this was just beat reporters and saying that it looked like he didn't have the same zip on the ball. Well, of course. If he got hit in the elbow just a couple of days ago, I would assume that he probably isn't throwing with the same arm strength as he normally would. Give it some time to rest, and the soreness will go away. And I think by Sunday he'll be fine. But the Titans offense, I don't know what to do with them at this point. I don't own any of them anywhere. I think I might have a share of Dion Lewis somewhere, but for the most part, I've stayed away from him because preseason. Did you see any of their preseason games? They look terrible.
Yeah, but I enjoy watching the pre-draft games. I just, you just never know, though. I've seen terrible teams in preseason that you know.
They can figure it out. It's just to start off the season, it's like the warning signs were all there. Yep. I mean, Rashard Matthews was mysteriously out for 2 to 3 months, didn't see a preseason snap. And then the entire team didn't look all that great. They didn't seem to be in sync. Dion Lewis is like the only bright spot. Derrick Henry was 7 attempts for like 18 yards by like the end of the first half. That's not good, Bob. That's not great, Bob. So well, it's like
we're gonna do. Let's do a few quick just comment things about week 1 so we can move on. The other, which these aren't injuries. This is just a thing for me. David Johnson's snap counts. I know you kind of said something earlier. I mean, he was way down. I think less than 60%. So, I think that's a worry also. I mean, are they just not going to use him as much with this new coaching staff?
I think that's the concern at this point, because it's not only just the rushing volume, because I think they had Chase Edmonds, the rookie, in there to spell Johnson, but it's the pass routes. So in the previous seasons, like his passing game was kind of what supplemented his value. I mean, he's a good rusher, don't get me wrong, but the guy's a converted wide receiver. So like his receiving ability is kind of what was the allure to drafting him. I mean, he was great in between the tackles and he can also run these routes. But if we're not going to get that, if who's the OC now? Mike McCoy.
Right.
He doesn't know how to use them. Right. I mean, we're kind of screwed in terms of the value that we perceived he would have here in the season.
Which we talked during the draft season. That's the issue. I made little comments about all these top round or first round running back. They all had a little thing that you had to question. And to me, new coaching staff, new offensive philosophies, I think are big question marks on first round running backs. I'm not willing to usually invest in that. That to me that's a big I don't know.
Yes. It's a lot to invest, and I think especially and if you look at it,
nowhere. I don't know Johnson nowhere.
No, I don't know him anywhere. Again, this is but just in a few leagues in best ball. But then if you looked at the situations, I think some of the signs were there. But this is all hindsight analysis. Don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. But I mean, you could look at the situation and say that. Well, we knew
that. You can say that, but neither me or you have him on our team.
Yeah.
We obviously knew enough that he wasn't a value where he was going.
Well, yeah, the offensive line was going to be poor. You could look at the quarterback play. It was Sam Bradford. It's Sam Bradford or a rookie. Now, regardless of how much faith you might have in Josh Rosen, again, it was going to be a rookie. So we didn't really see – and again, they also the coaching change as well, because they don't have Bruce Arians anymore. So all of these things – I mean, would kind of lead you to say that despite the talent, the situation isn't going to be as primed as it was in years past. I know he's coming off of an injury, and he should have fresh legs and all that jazz. I mean, it was just a wrist injury. Chase Edmonds.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. But I mean, who profiles like Dion Lewis?
I don't have.
But I mean, there were so many things pointing in the other direction that was just like, for me, it was hard to pull the trigger on him with that. I mean, with such an early pick.
All right, we gotta go. We gotta go quicker. Me and you don't do quick very easily.
We don't. We just don't.
The next big quick thing here, just a quick comment on the Miami game. All the weather delays. I literally, the game obviously started at 1:00. I was in Indianapolis. I watched the Bengals play live. I drove all the way home from Indianapolis back to Ohio. Some traffic issues. Obviously, it's like a 3-hour drive. And I come home, and that game is like in the third quarter. I mean,
the weather delays were ridiculous.
But I think a necessity. I mean. Player safety is one thing for the NFL. Obviously, fan safety is up there. You can't have a stadium full of people where it's a lot of bolts going down. But
true. That's why they wound up opening night. The game got delayed 45 minutes because of weather.
And I had Kenny Stills in a few leagues. I like.
There you go. I was high on Kenny Stills to start the season.
I hope it hangs out. Mm-hmm. The next game, just your quick comment, that's the Tampa Bay New Orleans game.
Boy.
Talk to that as one big game. If you had any of them in daily fantasy, if you took those two teams, and I'm assuming I don't play much daily. I did a few little things. I won more or less my money back this week. because and people make fun. The only thing I ever do is I put in Bengal stacks. I love to root for my Bengals. I do some Bengal stacks in a lot of the tournaments, and obviously right now the Bengals are perfect for stacking because you can get them all. I mean, you literally can get Dalton, Green, Mixon. That may change next week. I had Eifert. So I kind of went with that stack, and I actually scored almost 200 points. Unfortunately, it's not enough because people that had, people from this game, if you had Tampa Bay, if you had, Fitz and Evans, and obviously, if you had anyone else from the New Orleans side also, if you had stacked those two teams, you probably had 280 points.
Yeah, I think the Millie Maker lineup that I saw, TJ Hernandez that I work with over at 444, I think he posted the winning Millie Maker lineup, but it was an onslaught stack of Fitzpatrick, Djax, Alvin Kamara, and Michael Thomas. Right. I think those were the core plays with like James Conner and like a couple other folks in there, and like they had over 300 points, which is ridiculous.
Right. I mean, that was the thing. I scored well. And again, I mean, I know, if you're in the 220s, something like that, you're going to at least get some of your money back.
Yeah, you're doing well if you're in the 200s. Yeah.
Because the Bengals, and I had T.Y. Hill. Hey, I was going to the game. I stacked. I figured, because I wanted to see a shootout too. I'm like, maybe. I had Yeldon. I'm trying to think how I ended up doing it because I did two different teams because one I did Doyle and one I did Eifert. I split up the ends, which both ended up scoring about the same actually, I think. And then I added Ty and a few like that. So it was kind of, it was fun. Gives you something to root for. So that was a good stack. But definitely for fantasy sports. Now, what is sustainable out of either of those teams? Is Kamara sustainable? Is Fitz going to give us a few more weeks? Is Evans, as long as Fitzpatrick's in there, is he a bonus? What do you think we could see moving forward with these two teams? And what was just a 1 week fluke and nothing to get too excited about?
So on the New Orleans side, I think that is how you're going to see this team operate for the next 3 to 4 weeks until Mark Ingram comes back. I think that Alvin Kamara is the guy. So any of the preseason, stuff that Sean Payton was telling us about, they wanted to limit his touches and all that other junk. No, He came out, full force, and he did everything. Michael Thomas.
I'm hoping the rest of the season or at least the next few weeks. I have a lot more Ingram. I have no Kamara. I wasn't sold on him. I know he paid off week 1. We'll see. But I have a lot of Ingram though, because I thought his value later, and I got him. I know he moved up later, but a lot of times I got him, late enough. And because Gillislee didn't pay off and some of that, I'm like, I think for Ingram owners, this week actually looked good. Because I think when he's there, he's going to get some of what Kamara had.
Yeah, I believe so, and I don't think there's anybody on that particular team that I think loses value. I'll take that back. So the Cam Meredith hype, I'm kind of off that now, unless there's an injury to Ted Ginn, which he's nursing a knee injury. So there might be your window of opportunity for players like either Cameron Meredith or Traquan Smith.
Ted Ginn was a lot of benches this week.
Oh yeah. And that's understandable because you just never know, week 1, how they're going to deploy some of their people. So I can understand that. So I don't think there's too many flukes. Barring injury, I think that's how the team is going to operate with Tampa Bay. The only consistent part of that I can see continuing is the usage of both Mike Evans and OJ Howard. It does seem like OJ Howard separated himself in the battle between him and Cameron Brate. So at least for right now, while Ryan Fitzpatrick is the one that's calling all the plays, or at least he's the starting quarterback, I would lean on OJ Howard. Now, the deck will be completely reshuffled after Jameis Winston comes back. For right now, I can see most of that continuing. So I minus, actually take that back, with Deshaun Jackson being in the concussion protocol, we'll probably see a little bit more Chris Godwin.
Right. And you said it, though, if Fitzpatrick keeps playing like this, which, okay, he's not going to play like that, but, no. If he comes back to earth a little bit, will he even lose his job?
I think Jameis Winston is there. I mean, and they've already come out and said that. I think the front office or even the coaching staff are like Dirk Cutter already came out and said it's not 100% certain that Jameis Winston will be the starter once he comes back.
Okay,
yeah, right.
Here's something I heard from a beat guy this week, and maybe a day or two ago, that asked the same kind of question, and he said, you know what? He thinks it's more likely that Winston doesn't come back than we all think, and a lot of this has to do with the philosophy of ownership, and that in Tampa Bay, the team has removed Winston's they're not disowning him, but there is no likeness in any advertising. There's no, there is no Winston, poster signs in the community, meaning they are not pushing his name right now as as the spotlight of the team. So, is it, I get it. If Fitz had one good game and has two bad, it'll probably be fine. He'll come back. But at the same time, when I heard that to me, that makes me think a little bit.
Yeah, that's just called damage control. I mean, that's
and I know.
That's PR. That's just straight PR damage control. Right. I mean, they spent the number 1 overall pick on this kid.
Yeah, but
and they didn't draft anybody as a successor.
He wouldn't be the first number 1 quarterback that we see go away in the 3rd year. It happens.
It's been a while. I mean, for the first number 1 overall quarterback that's actually played well to just go away over that. I mean, that'd be a first for me. And then for them to just turn it over to Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Fitzy. I had that choice. That was my last decision Sunday morning on my my home league. It's a super flex league, but it's a little weird, the super flex league, because we have a 2 quarterback maximum roster. So there for a 12 team 2 quarterback league, usually there's no quarterbacks, but in ours there's always quarterbacks. You actually can stream in this 2 quarterback league, which makes it a little, makes it different, makes it still a little bit fun.
Makes it interesting, yeah.
So my final decision of the morning was Keenum or Fitzpatrick. And actually Flacco was there and a few others, but I kind of, that was my decision, and I went with Keenum, which still paid off. Keenum had
he had a great day.
I won that league by over 100 points, so it wouldn't have mattered who I picked. But
300 yards, 3 TDs, and 2 interceptions, something like that.
He did great. And the reason I made that decision wasn't, if it was just based on that day, it was kind of a coin flip for me. The key to me was Keenum has a better game this week also, so I figured I at least was going to have Keenum for 2 weeks. Where Patrick, I thought I would have to make another decision. So,
if you had the balls to start Ryan Fitzpatrick week 1,
as a second,
hats off to you.
I really had text a few people back. Debating it. I really think it didn't. Okay, what he did surprised me, the overall number, but I really thought he was going to go out there and just throw the ball. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I thought he was going to have a 20-point game. I really thought he was going to throw the ball. He's, because he will.
Gunslinger. Yeah.
So, and in fantasy, that's value. I mean, that can be value of someone off the waiver wire.
Sure. Yeah, unless you play in one of those leagues. I mean, for me, I think that the touchdown variance is going to hit him because I think, especially against Philadelphia this upcoming weekend. I mean, assuming that the weather doesn't supremely impact that particular game, I can see him some of those passes, those long passes that he was hitting and all that. I can see them getting picked. Right. I can just see. I mean, there's just, for me, I'm hard pressed to believe Ryan Fitzpatrick having these just 2 beautifully perfect games back to back without any interceptions. I feel like it's going to hit this.
All right, I'll keep Keenum one more week.
There you go. He was my top streamer in my weekly column anyway. So yeah, take it.
All right. Again, we've gone an hour, and now we'll get to our topic.
There we go.
We do every week, we do a do's and don'ts section anyway. And this week I was just hoping to expand a little more, mainly just to give some newer fantasy people and maybe just sometimes people who've played for a few years but don't, know that there are some, do's and don'ts or strategies or things that can work, especially early in the season. So we're going to just go through some, do's and don'ts, some things to get excited about or not get excited about. Obviously, we ran out of time to discuss too much as far as, most of y'all have done waiver wires and all that already. Well, I'm going to start with you, and you go whatever order because we're going to throw a few different ones out. just give me a do or a don't that you would tell a new fantasy person that after week one, what would be a tip you'd give somebody?
I'll start with the do. Go check the transactions. Go see who got dropped in your league.
Yeah,
a lot of people have overreacted, and I've seen. I was just talking about this on my other podcast. I saw Ben Roethlisberger out there on waivers. I saw the New Orleans defense out there on waivers. I've seen David Njoku out there on waivers. I mean, there are a number of players that folks are dropping after poor week one performances, and they've overreacted and they've cut bait. Take advantage of that.
Right.
Take advantage of that. Pick those players up that you know that have the talent and the ability to perform, and also have pretty sweet matchups actually coming up this upcoming weekend. So definitely, and do that every week, not just after week one, but always check the transactions,
especially week one. And I have that on my do list also. And I even say if you have an early waiver wire and you don't want to use that necessarily for somebody who's up this week, you know what? Don't use it. Wait and pick up sometimes there's better players dropped than, if you're a good player and you know what to look for in players, sometimes there's better players dropped than you would have got with your number one waiver wire. So
absolutely,
sometimes you're better off using it, saving it for later and, doing that. So yes, definitely keep an eye on, who gets dropped and how you can use them for your team. I think,
right.
That was one I had here. So that's one. Another one I'll do a do. This is kind of only because I've made this mistake, and it's a little tip. And I threw out Wednesday's a big throw out some trade type things, especially on ESPN. Or on most of the sites now. Once you submit a trade offer to somebody, go in and click on your transaction button or your pending things and make sure the trade you thought you were offered is what was offered.
Oh, that's a good one.
I have truly, you get kind of excited about dealing trades. So you click on, well, if I trade, especially on ESPN, when it's easy to click that sit, drop, button. And, I have submitted trades before, and then I go and look at the activity. I go, wait a minute, he wasn't supposed to be in there. So you know what? Once you send a trade out, and I know some sites are better than others, and some the app does one way, the computer does another. But regardless, even if it says confirm and you hit confirm and you read it, go and make sure in your transactions that what you wanted to offer is what was offered, because it's a whole lot harder to convince your commissioner that you didn't mean to do that than it is just to cancel that trade and resubmit the proper one.
Right. I'm definitely with that, because at least for me, I'll go back and forth over some of the players that I actually want to send and like who I want to receive a number of times, to the point where I have to do that before I check, because I might have some extra players to check that I was thinking about trading and, dismiss the idea of doing it. So yeah, definitely for that. I'm 100% with you there.
All right. How about you? You got another do or a don't for a young fantasy player going after week one?
My don't, I guess, falls right in line with my do, is that, don't overreact. I think the easiest, it's week one. These offenses have had, offenses and defenses, rather, they've had months. They've known their schedule. They've known who their opponent was going to be for months now. So they've had all this extra time to prepare for week one. And now they have to figure out how to adjust for week two based off of injuries and some of the plays that worked, things that didn't work. So if the teams are having to adjust, we need to wait and see exactly how all the offensive units, defensive units, things of that nature are going to coalesce. So don't freak out and drop some of your high priority players, like your quarterback that you drafted. That's right. That should have at least a QB1 talent. Don't drop that tight end or wide receiver or running back just because they had one poor game. I would say at the very least, you should be waiting at least till week 2 or week 3 before you decide to cut bait on a lot of these players. So unless there's some sort of injury, like if you had Delaney Walker and they're going to be out for the rest of the season, there shouldn't be any reason for you to be dropping some of these players.
Right. And I get that. And I get upset with some of these fantasy experts, I'll say, or podcasts where they're always, I think they oversell how important, I bet I've heard it on 10 podcasts in the last few days listening to that this is the most important free agent market of the season because you're going to get that guy for 15 weeks. But you know what? I disagree with that. You can make any of it your best one if you get the right player, period. Can you get top players that make a difference in week one once in a while? But I've seen enough statistics that it's not necessarily true. There's just as good a shot you're going to get a season changer in week 3, So same thing, right? Don't overreact. And just because all these experts are telling you, this is, if you're going to spend your fab, this is the week to spend it. I just disagree. I want options. I want options now. And, if you're a terrible drafter, maybe it's your only option that you get a TJ Yeldon right now,
or Philip Lindsay. That was the other hot waiver pickup. Austin Eckler. That was another big waiver pickup from
I drafted well enough that I don't have anyone to drop for those kind of players. So I think
the only player that I think I dropped off of most of my teams, I did drop Giovanni Bernard because I have a feeling I can wind up picking him up at some point anyway. So I wanted to at least grab one of the hot pickups from this week. So I think I did drop him, but other than that, no, I didn't. My team was solid enough that I didn't have to.
Right. Like I said, in 2 leagues, I dropped my kickers to pick up Brandon Marshall. And mainly I had to do that because unfortunately I can't put Baldwin on the injured reserve yet. So, obviously once I can move him, then I'll have a spot open and can pick up another kicker, which is another reason why I love kickers in leagues. People hate them. And Cha-Cha in the chat room, I'd be curious, I think you're one of those that hates kickers. You know what? To me, that's just another reason I like having kickers in my league. It gives me a spot on my roster where I can move somebody without a big change in my roster, even if I have a good kicker sometimes, and like in this case, I picking up Brandon Marshall to me was worth losing my kicker, for a few days until I can move Baldwin, to an IR spot. In the 2 leagues I needed, I was able to pick up the Bears late as my defenses. So I hated to drop the Bears because I think that could pay off in the long run, but I definitely was willing to pick, and I always do that. I mean, they're one of those I'm going to drop to pick up a player if I think they have value, but I won't use a waiver for those. I will wait till the waiver wire's over, drop my player, and I'll just pick up somebody. Like in this case, Brandon Marshall wasn't picked up. So, I agree. That pays off. Which will be back to I'm kind of go the same way a little bit is my don't is, what? Especially new players, don't immediately accept a trade, even if it looks super great. Take a minute, even say a minute, I might take hours, but one, always look at your options, make sure it's a trade that helps your team, make sure, maybe, shoot an offer back, even though you're maybe willing to accept that one, but the key is I've seen too many people hit a button and say accept. And then, a day later they're going, I probably shouldn't have done that. Take your time, make sure you're doing something that's going to make your team better. And what I always like about trade offers is it kind of gives me an idea who's targeting on my team, who's this guy want, and maybe, okay, I might be willing to trade him, but maybe let me try if this other guy's willing to give me somebody better first. So I'll make as soon as if someone immediately says, hey, I want Aaron Rodgers from you. Well, if he wants, maybe someone else does. So I immediately will take Aaron Rodgers and say, this guy has a bad quarterback. Let me see what he's willing to give me first. So I'll look at a trade that was offered to me and immediately offer the same player as somebody else just to see what my options are before I hit accept, So, play the game a little bit, have fun with it. And don't just hit accept, even if it's a good offer. I realize every once in a while, you hear, people calling and go, you're not going to believe this, but I got so-and-so for so-and-so. And some people say, yeah, you would never not just hit accept. But in most leagues, most of competitive leagues, the trade's going to be equal enough that you can take a little bit of time and study it.
Yeah. And actually, I do have an example of that, of people overreacting and then also accepting trades, I think, a bit too quickly or prematurely. This one came across my timeline earlier today.
Premature trader.
Oh, yes. And so this was a PPR league. and the offer was Jared Cook and Dion Lewis for Kareem Hunt, and that trade was accepted. I think that's too much.
Yeah.
I would not be able to do that deal. I think somebody was overreacting to Kareem Hunt's poor stat line in week 1, and then obviously with Jared Cook going off, which I don't think is sustainable. I think he might have a few good weeks, but I'm not trading for a tight end.
I agree. I agree. And then that is back to reacting, and that's what you said, and that was our main, don't overreact.
Mm-hmm.
It's week 1, and I debated on our show tonight to talk about, sell high, buy low kind of things. And yeah, this is still a week you can look at that a little bit, especially in some home leagues. But most good players, and actually I have it jotted down that next week that's something we'll be talking more about. And that's to me, next week's when once you've had 2 weeks of certain stuff, more players are a little, trigger happy after 2, than they are 1. So, I root for my bench players, man. I root for them hard because they're my trade bait, So I want to have that bench player to go off a couple of games so that I have maybe trade bait where somebody would want that person,
Exactly. I'd rather have them. I mean, even if I wind up taking an L for the weekend because I didn't start a person, like I think in the leagues that I had Kenny Stills, I think one of them I had him on my bench because I wound up starting Emmanuel Sanders over him, which is I'm fine with. But again, I would rather know that I have that depth or the option to have somebody to start in place of some of those players than having them on somebody else's team.
Right. And that's my point. I mean, and you kind of, the way you worded it, I wouldn't have worded it that way, meaning when I set my lineup, I'm happy. I don't get upset that people on my bench outscored my starters. Those mistakes, I don't even like to call them mistakes. That happens.
It does.
It doesn't mean you made, me and your poker guys. So it doesn't mean that you didn't make the right decision. It just didn't pay off. But having your bench goes off. I love having the highest scoring bench in a week, because again, people will look at that and offer you trades sometimes, Now, and I've also done this where people will look at a guy on your bench and not give them the respect. I've had to, text or tweet people back that have offered me trades. I'll say, hey, just because he's on my bench doesn't mean he's not a starter. So if you want to trade for him, you're going to have to pay me a starter because he is a starter. I just have 2 better people than him, So make sure you look at your bench that way. If they're starter quality people, you need to get starting quality people back in some cases. So, again, just because they're on your bench shouldn't mean that and I've had people say that, well, he's just been on your bench for 2 weeks. I assumed you would want, a defense for him. No. He's a number 1 for and that's what I'm going to do with him. So, any other, again, I had a few more written down, but we've already gone way over time, which we always do. But any other major or important do or don't you'd want to tell somebody out there?
Not for this week. I think this week is kind of, again, a wait and see type of week. So don't overreact. Check and see if other players or other owners in your league are overreacting, and and take advantage of their overreaction.
And also don't overreact to the ESPN guesstimate points or whatever they want to call them, or projections.
Yeah.
You know what? You drafted the guys based on, in most cases, data other than ESPN if you did it right. So if you're confident in what you drafted, even though that your guys might be going up against better teams or whatever, because again, we're only 1 week in. No one still really knows the great defenses yet. That type thing. So, you know what? Don't overreact in how you would set your lineup right now either.
Right.
You drafted your top players, put in your top players, play your top players. It's week 2. So that would be my other, don't overreact to those numbers you see on the app or anything like that. Start your starters, and I know, you start your big dogs and all that, and people go, yeah, but this is my 4th round pick. And no, your 4th round pick is a dog. You know what? Put him in. So if you drafted it, in my case, if you drafted right, your first 5, 6, 7 picks should be in your starting lineup again this week.
Exactly.
So do that up. I got one last thing And actually, our viewership is up. I don't know if you number wise, we've had multiple downloads. We're on iTunes now. We're on the Lenny Melnick FantasySports.com. We're in the chat room. So we have multiple things, and unfortunately now I've been doing this for me and you've been doing this like 9 months, which is hard to believe. And then
has it really been that long? My goodness,
started like in January.
And wow,
it's still pretty. But now Facebook now is what, 2 months, I think. We've only been videoing for a few months. But,
yeah, that's true.
So now I do have some league members that now know who Easy Kill is. So I have some league members that are following me. But I have an issue this week, real quick. People, if you're done, that's fine. Now we're going to get personal. I realize this is an ESPN issue, not our league issue, but at the same time, I brought it up to the league because I don't think it's right. What is your? Let me word the question this way first, and maybe I should have done it. And that is, if you got a message to vote on a rule in your league, and the message was, should players that are sitting out because of contract disputes, should they be allowed to be on the IR spot? Yes or no? How would you vote?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Honestly,
maybe being in an IR spot to me is wrong. He is not injured, but ESPN has him as out, and ESPN is eligible for an IR sit. And you cannot change that. So our league put it to a vote today. Now, obviously, the Bell owner isn't happy because he has to use up that spot.
Yeah.
His issue is this should have been something that was voted on before the season. That you can't change it once the season starts.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, okay. My issue with that would be, and I understand because I know this league. This is a personal league where we all were in a room together drafting. He drafted Bell number 1 because Bell, in his opinion, was going to play week 1. He did not draft Bell assuming he was going to be able to put him in his IR spot if he didn't. Meaning the player was not drafted with any, I have drafted
the risk.
Right. I have drafted injured reserve quality players late in the draft knowing I'm going to bump them down there week 1 and pick up players. I've done that. I've got Foreman on a couple of my teams at my IR spot because I drafted him late, just in case Miller doesn't pay off. So to me, the reason that I agree, I know what you're saying. There are certain things that you cannot change, and most rules you cannot change after season starts because people draft based on those rules. No one already drafted knowing if they have a player that is sitting out because of a contract dispute, they could put them on the IR spot. So to me, this rule could be changed during the regular season and not technically change anybody's, he admitted early on in the conversation that, I was surprised I could put him there. I don't know. I think this is an ESPN problem first, but as a league, our league has put it up to a vote. It's actually closer than we think. And unfortunately, our commissioner worded the question wrong. I actually had to vote for it, to be honest. Even though I'm against it, I had to vote for it because the way he worded the question in our vote was, if someone is ruled out on ESPN, should they not be allowed to be in the IR spot? To me, that's the wrong way to word the question because there are players that are injured that are marked as out. What I'm saying? So that person to me still should be able to be in an IR spot. Just like I said, like Foreman. Foreman is marked as out on ESPN, not IR, not injured. So the way he worded the question for our league to vote was, can only guys that have the IR on them be allowed to be in the IR spot? So I had to vote no. I do think they can be if they're out, they still should be able to be in the IR spot. Their problem is Bell is marked as out. So if that's the way you vote, then you have to allow both. My thing was the question should have been worded, if someone is sitting out because of a contract dispute, should they be qualified? Because technically he's not even on a roster.
They removed
He's not on the 53.
Yeah, he is.
He is on the 53?
I'm 90% certain he's on the 53-man roster.
So I understand where most people would come down that have played a long time. And it's like the rules are the rules. You just got to play with them.
Yeah.
I just find it odd that ESPN would have allowed it. And
that is kind of surprising.
You can't put Mark Ingram down there. You know, the suspended players aren't eligible. But I don't know.
It's kind of weird. I think that if anything, so if that's the way that ESPN is gonna designate those, I think at least from the way I understand it, the best way to do it would be to treat it on as a case by case basis, and then as a league, you guys would set up the conditions for players that can go in the IR spot.
And that's what I texted the commissioner. I said, you worded the question wrong. Yeah. This needs to be an individual question with no player names. You know, you can't just say, does Bell need to be in or out of the IR? To me, that's personal now. The question just needed to be if a player's not playing due to a contractual issue, will our league allow him to or not to be on the IR spot? And
you could make it even more general than that and say that, or like open it up for a vote to the league and have you guys set up what conditions should be allowed to go into the IR spot. So in the case of the suspension, should Mark Ingram's suspension allow him to be put in the IR spot? And then they can vote on that.
Right.
Contractual disputes.
Now the problem with that is that now to me could not go into effect during the season. That needs to be voted on before you
100%. And that was back to my original point, because I said all that stuff should have been decided beforehand.
The issue is this has happened now, meaning this affects our league this week, and a few of us aren't happy with it. Meaning it shouldn't be. It's not right. The intent of the rule is that. Even the guy who owns Bell was surprised that he could be down there. Because again, for 10 weeks, it does make it. I'll sit on Bell longer if I could hide him in an IR spot, not take up a spot. So just one of those oddball things that a website. Things happen that no one thinks will happen, and then now you don't have rules to, abide by it. So. I don't know. Thought it was a little strange. And to be honest, I have played in leagues where suspended players do go in there also.
That's weird. I haven't played in a league like that, so I'd have to check it out. But I mean, that'd definitely be one where you would need to talk with. The league has to come together as a whole to decide on it
and do it first. But the problem is, I don't think those are the little things when commissioners that haven't run a lot of leagues or just don't know, or it just hasn't come up before, so your league doesn't know, and it just people, because I am one of those too. I would take advantage of a rule if I can find it, and it's within the rules. And I would be the first to, if this would have happened to me, obviously I'd have moved Bell down there too. But I can tell you, you know who notified the league that this happened?
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think out of the 12 people in our league, which person do you think notified?
It's not that hard to figure out,
right? Because that's the thing. If it had been me, I'd have moved him down there. No one would have said a word because they wouldn't have known. No one was the thing. I immediately saw it and went, that's wrong. And I made sure everyone knew.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I know you the second you saw it. Well, that's bullshit. So I'm going to tell somebody.
Exactly what I said.
I know.
I said, Commissioner, what setting do you have that allows him to put him down there? And he goes, I don't know. And he goes, I looked. He goes, I looked. He said, I can't change it. I couldn't. So I obviously had to go into the commissioner thing too and see, well, can you change it? And you can. Yeah. If the team marks him as out, ESPN says he's eligible for the IR spot. So to me, ESPN is a different. They have the suspension label, that SSPP or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah, SSPP.
They have out, they have questionable, and they have IR.
Yep.
Out.
Donta Foreman is listed as out. He's on IR.
Now, I don't know why, but that's what he says. Right? He's on IR for 6 weeks. He's on the PUP.
Yeah. So how does that work out?
That's why I had to vote. And the kid even looked at the kid, texted me back. He goes, you even voted for it, even though you're the one who brought it up. I said, no, I know. The way he worded the question will affect more players than Bell. And it will affect players that, to me, are really injured, and that's not right. So, the way he worded the question, I said he needs to reword the vote. Now, right now, the vote's 5-3, I think. So I think he's going to lose anyway. But the commissioner did say, At first he said, well, the rule's the rule. We can't change it now. And I said, no, we can do whatever we want if you ask.
Oh, yeah.
I said, you need to put it to a vote and just ask people, is this a rule we should put in place? And if so, should blah, blah, blah. Well, and then he still worded the question a little odd that made it, if a player's marked out, and then quotes he put Bell, should he still be? Well, no, you can't word it that way because other people are out that are really injured. So it was just one of those fun things. And you know what? The guy unfortunately has a shitty team. It really isn't even.
That's the worst.
But it's still, me. It's still if we're gonna play the game, play it right.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Take advantage of fair rules, not take advantage of shitty rules. So. Mm-hmm. All right, Chris, I had a good time. We went way too long. I always do. I got more pages of questions and stuff. Pretty excited, though, about tomorrow night. Wear my Bengal shirt to work. We'll have a good time. We will be here again next Wednesday. We'll have week 2 stuff. We'll get into a little bit of that was my thing. Next week, we'll get into some of the, who do you want to sell high? Who do you want to buy low? What are those options? After week 2, to me, those things start kicking in a little more. So where can people find your work? Where can they find you?
You can find my weekly quarterback streaming column on 4for4.com. And also, you can look at some of the I've actually done some contributions to Sports Illustrated over the past couple of weeks. So you can find some of my freelance stuff over at Sports Illustrated, actually. And then you can find me on Twitter at Chris Allen FFWX. And
you're posting most of those things on Twitter too, right? So
you'll see all my stuff retweeted across Twitter.
Now, I don't know. Is on the 4for4 stuff, is that behind the firewall, or can people see most of your stuff at no charge, or do they need
my off-season work, all of that you can see for free. I think the weekly streaming column, though, is behind the paywall. Okay. I think, but don't quote me on that.
All right. And I did talking to Andrea and Lenny, and I'm telling you, I'm going to force you to get into the chat room. They want to know if we'd be interested in maybe – and they know we do this for fun and you do more than me and we're busy, but maybe on, sometime towards the end of a week, a Saturday or early Sunday or sometime where we said, hey, me and Chris will be in the chat room between here and here for people who have football questions or something like that. Is that something you'd be interested in?
Sure. Why not?
All right. Well, then you need to go to Lenny Melnick, fantasysports.com, set up a little, at this point you can put, if you're Chris Allen, in there, they'll know who you are. And then, if I know, me and you will talk off air and get an idea what would be a good time for both of us to where we kind of can say, hey, anybody wants to put a question in the chat room, me and Chris will be watching the chat room from between this time and this time. And we'll answer football questions or something for them. So
sounds like fun.
Because again, there are a lot of baseball guys. There's some other fantasy football. There's a lot of them that do football. But to have somebody that, to help them out a little bit. So so people go out there, sign up, and you'll get us out there in the chat room. I'm easy on Twitter, just easy at afantasyfan. You can find me there. Don't forget our hotline. 937-719-1099. Call, leave a question or a trade situation, anything you want. Be loud and clear so I can edit it and we can add you to the next show, so that we can get you on the air and do that. I think it'll be kind of fun. And hopefully that phone number will turn into a number where people can call live. I got an updated mixer before we can do that. So that way we can make these hour shows go a little longer since we're already at an hour and a half tonight. So we need to add one more person or 2 more people to this so we can really,
2-hour show. Let's do it.
have a good time. So we appreciate y'all coming out here again. This has been easy. That's Chris Allen. Everybody say good night.
This has been Just a Fantasy Fan podcast. And to keep your fantasies going, follow us at justafantasyfan.com. Say good night. Good night.